William! Her voice came from everywhere and nowhere, from the letter trembling in his hands, from the stone beneath his fingers, from 22 years of silence he had mistaken for indifference. If Caroline is standing beside you, then I already know what you chose. He had come home expecting tears. He had come home expecting fury. He had not come home expecting this, a dead woman's words cutting through him cleaner than anything the living had ever managed. She had known. She had always known. And she had forgiven him anyway. If this story moves something deep inside you, please subscribe to our channel and drop the name of your city in the comments below. I want to see just how far this story travels. The summer of 1817 sat heavy over Virginia, like a wool blanket no one asked for. The kind of heat that made horses irritable and men stupid. William Harrington had been stupid for quite some time now, though he'd spent the better part of 6 months convincing himself otherwise. He sat inside the carriage with Caroline Whitmore beside him, her gloved hand resting lightly on his arm, her perfume filling the small space between them with something floral and foreign. She smelled nothing like Harrington Estate. She smelled nothing like home. He told himself that was a good thing. The wheels of the carriage rolled over the familiar gravel road, and William felt something shift in his chest. A pressure. The kind a man feels when he knows somewhere beneath all his reasoning and rationalizing that he has made a mistake he cannot name yet. He pressed it down. He had been pressing things down for 6 months. "You're quiet," Caroline said softly. "I'm thinking." About her. William turned and looked at Caroline. She was 29 years old. Beautiful in the way that a painting is beautiful, all surface and light arranged just so. Her brown eyes watched him with that familiar mixture of affection and calculation that he had once mistaken for depth. "I'm thinking about the estate," he said. That was not entirely a lie. Say, he had left Harrington Estate in January in the dead of winter with the excuse of business in Boston. That part was true enough. There was business. There was always business. But the reason he had never spoken aloud to Elizabeth, never offered her the dignity of honesty, was Caroline. He had met Caroline Whitmore at a dinner party the previous autumn hosted by the Aldrich family. She had laughed at something he said, and it had felt like sunlight coming through a window he had forgotten was there. He had been 46 years old, and she had made him feel 30 again. Elizabeth had not made him feel 30 in many years. He told himself that was Elizabeth's fault. He had spent 6 months in Boston building that argument into something that felt almost like truth. Now the carriage slowed. The iron gates of Harrington Estate came into view tall and black against the pale summer sky, the letter H wrought into the metal the way it had been for 3 generations of Harrington men. William had always felt a swell of pride at those gates. Today, he felt something else. The gates swung open. Someone had seen them coming, and the carriage rolled through. William leaned forward, expecting the usual sight. The house staff arranged along the front walk, cook standing near the door with her hands folded. Young James from the stable already moving toward the horses. The front walk was empty. The steps were empty. The wide front porch of Harrington Estate where Elizabeth had stood every single time he returned from travel. Every single time, even when their marriage had gone cold and formal and polite, was empty. Only one figure stood at the door. Thomas Reed. Thomas had been the estate's head steward for 11 years. He was a tall man, lean with silver at his temples, and a posture that never quite relaxed. William had always respected Thomas. He was a man who did his job without drama or complaint. Thomas Reed was not a man who showed emotion. But when William stepped down from the carriage and looked at him, really looked, he saw something on Thomas's face that he had never seen there before. It looked like grief. It looked like judgment. "Thomas." William straightened his coat. "Where is everyone?" Thomas stepped forward. He was holding something, a letter sealed with wax. "Sir," Thomas said. His voice was steady in the way that a voice is steady only when it has been practiced into steadiness. "I need to speak with you before you go inside." William frowned. Behind him, he heard Caroline step down from the carriage, heard the soft brush of her skirts against the gravel. "Speak then," William said. Thomas's eyes moved briefly, just briefly, to Caroline, then back to William. "Mrs. Harrington passed away, sir. 3 weeks ago, this past Tuesday." The world did not stop. That was the strangest part. The birds kept on. The summer heat kept pressing down. Somewhere in the stable yard, a horse stamped and blew. The world kept going, and William Harrington stood very still in the middle of it and felt something cave in inside his chest. "What did you say, Mrs. Harrington?" Thomas's voice did not waver. "She passed on the 14th of July. She was buried in the family plot beside your father as she requested." A pause. "She left very clear instructions, sir, about many things." William could not speak. His mouth was open. He knew that. He could feel the summer air on his teeth. Elizabeth. Elizabeth was gone. He had spent 6 months imagining her at Harrington Estate, furious waiting. He had spent 6 months building a version of this moment in his mind, the confrontation, the tears, her pleading, his standing firm. He had rehearsed speeches. He had prepared for her anger. He had not once prepared for her absence. How? The word came out thinner than he intended. Her heart, sir. Dr. Albright attended her in the final weeks. She knew. Thomas paused again. She knew for some time. She knew. William turned that over. And she didn't. He stopped. Started again. No one sent word to Boston. Mrs. Harrington did not wish it. Thomas's eyes were steady on his. Those were her instructions. She was very specific, sir. She said, and I am quoting her directly, she said, "Do not bring William home on my account. He has made his choice. Let him make it freely." Caroline had come to stand beside him. He felt her hand on his arm, the same light touch from the carriage, the same gloved fingers, and he stepped away from it. He did not plan to. It happened before he thought about it. He stepped away from Caroline Whitmore, and he walked toward Thomas Reed, and he held out his hand for the letter. Thomas placed it there. The seal was Elizabeth's, the small pressed rose she had used for as long as he could remember, the one her mother had given her when they married. He had teased her about that seal once, called it sentimental. She had smiled and said, "Most worthwhile things are." He looked at his name written on the front. William, not Mr. Harrington. Not the formal address she had adopted in the later years of their marriage when warmth between them had calcified into courtesy. Just William. In her handwriting, that careful, slanted, deliberate hand, she had the hand that had kept the household accounts and written letters to half of Virginia on behalf of the Harrington family for 20 years. He could not open it. Not here. Not with Caroline standing 6 feet behind him in the gravel drive. "Thomas," he said, and his voice came out rough like something dragged across stone. "Have Mrs. Whitmore shown to the—" He stopped. He could not say the blue room. Elizabeth had slept in the blue room the last 3 years. "Have her shown to the east guest room." "Of course, sir. And I need—" He cleared his throat. "I need a moment." "Yes, sir." He went to the library. It was Elizabeth's room, more than his. She had arranged it, chosen the books, spent her evenings there with her reading and her correspondence. The leather chair by the window had a slight depression in the left armrest, where she always rested her elbow. He sat down in his own chair, the one he'd used when he bothered to use it, and he broke the seal. The letter was 4 pages. Elizabeth had never been a woman of few words when words were warranted. William. If you are reading this, then you have returned to Harrington Estate. And if Caroline Whitmore is standing beside you, or somewhere nearby, then I know what the past 6 months have held for you. I want you to know that I am not writing this letter in anger. I tried in the beginning to write it in anger. It would have been easier. But I have been given sufficient time to think, and I find that what I feel is not anger. What I feel is tired, William. I have been tired for a very long time. There are things I need you to know before you make any final decisions about this estate, about this family, and about yourself. Not because I am trying to manipulate you from the grave, I leave that to lesser women, but because you deserve the truth, and because I believe underneath everything, you are still capable of receiving it. In the study, in the bottom drawer of my writing desk, you will find a collection of documents I have gathered over the past 3 years. I am asking you, not commanding, asking to read them before you do anything else. Read them, William. All of them. Then decide what kind of man you want to be. Whatever you choose, I want you to know this. I loved you. I loved you when it was easy and when it was very hard. I loved you even when you forgot to love me back. I do not regret a single year. Your Elizabeth. Psst. He read it twice. Then he sat in the leather chair in the library of Harrington Estate, and he pressed the letter flat against his chest. And William Harrington, who had not cried since his father's funeral 22 years ago, felt something happen behind his eyes that he did not know how to stop. He stopped it anyway. He had always been good at that. Caroline found him an hour later. He was still in the library, but he had moved. He was standing at Elizabeth's writing desk, the bottom drawer open, looking at what was inside. Not a few papers, dozens of documents, ledgers, letters, contracts, correspondence bearing the seals of banks of creditors of men whose names William recognized as the names of men who had once threatened to call in debts he had not known existed. William. Caroline stood in the doorway. She had changed from her traveling dress into something lighter pale yellow, impractical for the country. Come eat something. Thomas has had supper prepared. Not yet. You've been in here for an hour. I know. He heard her come into the room, heard her stop a few feet from the desk. What is all of that? Documents. He picked up the first ledger. The handwriting was Elizabeth's. The dates began in 1812. My wife's documents. A pause. William, I understand this is a shock. Truly. But there's nothing to be gained from... She saved the estate. He said it flatly, without looking up. In 1812, when the western fields flooded and we lost the tobacco harvest. I remember that year. I was in Richmond for most of it. I came home and the accounts were stable and I assumed... He stopped. He read a line again. I assumed the harvest hadn't been as bad as the foreman said. What are you saying? He looked up at Caroline. I'm saying Elizabeth negotiated with 3 separate creditors that year. She arranged a payment schedule with the First Bank of Virginia without telling me, because she knew I would have been too proud to ask for time. She sold 2 of her own pieces of jewelry pieces from her mother to cover the gap. He set the ledger down. And she never told me. Caroline pressed her lips together. Why would she do that? Because she was protecting me. He laughed, but there was nothing humorous in it. It was the sound of a man realizing something too late. She was always protecting me. That was her whole... He couldn't finish. He picked up another document, then another. He read through the night. Caroline eventually went to bed. He heard her footsteps on the stairs, heard the guest room door close. He barely noticed. He sat in Elizabeth's chair. Her chair he recognized, that now the leather worn to the shape of her, and he read 22 years of his wife's life. She had kept everything, not in the way of a woman building a case against her husband. There were no accusatory notes, no lists of grievances, just records. Clean, methodical, honest records of everything she had done to keep Harrington Estate alive, while William Harrington pursued his business and his vanity, and eventually his mistress. In 1813, when a neighboring landowner, a man named Aldridge, a man William had always thought of as a friendly acquaintance, had quietly begun buying up parcels of land adjacent to the Harrington property Elizabeth had noticed. She had noticed, and she had investigated, and she had quietly arranged the purchase of a key strip of land that blocked Aldridge's strategy, entirely funding it through careful management of the household accounts over 8 months. William had not known. William had never known. In 1815, when drought hit the county and 3 other estates in the region had been forced to sell livestock, Harrington Estate had weathered it. William had accepted compliments about his foresight in building reserves. The reserves had been Elizabeth's doing. All of it. He found a letter from her doctor dated the previous autumn. A letter confirming what she had suspected, that her heart was weakening, that she had perhaps a year, perhaps less. Below it, in Elizabeth's handwriting, a note she had written to herself. Do not tell William. He has enough weight. He must be free to make his choices without guilt tipping the scales. If he stays, let him stay freely. If he goes, let him go freely. That is the only way it means anything. William put the note down on the desk. He stared at it for a long time. She had known she was dying. She had known, and she had kept it from him, not out of bitterness, not to punish him, but because she wanted his choices to be real. She wanted whatever he did to mean something. Even then, even knowing what he was doing in Boston, even carrying her own death quietly in her chest like a secret she refused to burden him with. Elizabeth Harrington had still been thinking about what was best for him. Thomas knocked at the library door just after 4 in the morning. Sir. He stood in the doorway, a lamp in his hand. He took in the sight of William, coat off, cravat loosened, surrounded by papers, without visible reaction. I thought you might want coffee. Come in, Thomas. Thomas set the coffee on the edge of the desk and began to turn. How long did you know, William asked, about her heart? Thomas was quiet for a moment. She told me in November, sir. 8 months ago. Yes, sir. And the others? The staff. She told us all, sir, in her own time, in her own way. She wanted to make sure everyone was settled, that everyone knew their positions would be secure, regardless of... Thomas stopped. Regardless of what I did, William finished. Yes, sir. William looked at the steward. Thomas Reed, who had served this house for 11 years and had just spent 3 weeks managing his grief quietly while keeping the estate running. Thomas Reed, who had stood at that door yesterday afternoon, now and delivered the worst news of William's life with steady hands, because Elizabeth had probably asked him to be steady, had probably told him exactly what to say. She prepared you, William said, for all of this. She prepared everything, sir. Thomas's voice was careful. She was a very thorough woman, Mrs. Harrington. I know. William looked down at the papers. I'm only beginning to understand how thorough. A long silence stretched between them. Thomas. William didn't look up. The staff, are they still? Every one of them, sir. Cook, the maids, the stable hands. Mrs. Harrington spoke to each of them personally before the end. She made certain they all had reason to stay. She made certain. William repeated it slowly. Even at the end. Especially at the end, sir. When the sun came up, William was still in the library. He had made his way through most of the documents. His coffee had gone cold twice, and Thomas had replaced it twice without being asked. He had discovered 3 things that he did not know how to carry. The first Harrington estate, as it stood today, profitable, intact, respected among Virginia's landed families, existed almost entirely because of Elizabeth Harrington's intelligence, her patience, and her willingness to do what needed doing without asking for credit. The second, Robert Aldridge, the man William had counted a friendly neighbor, the man who had hosted the dinner party where William had met Caroline Whitmore, had been systematically working to acquire Harrington land and undermine Harrington's reputation for the better part of a decade. Elizabeth had documented all of it. She had been building a case quietly and carefully for years. The third, the most recent document in the drawer, was a letter from Elizabeth to her solicitor dated just 2 months before her death. In it, she outlined her final wishes regarding the estate. She left everything, the land, the house, the accounts, the decisions, to William. No conditions attached to the inheritance itself, but a request he was not ready for yet. He closed the drawer. He stood up from the chair, and his knees ached from a night spent hunched over papers, and he walked to the window. The summer morning was spreading gold across the fields. Elizabeth had loved this time of day. He remembered that. She used to be up before him, and sometimes he would find her standing at a window just like this, watching the light move across the land. He had never stood beside her and watched. He had never thought to. He heard footsteps on the stairs. Caroline appeared in the library doorway, fresh and arranged in a way that told him she had been awake and preparing for some time. She was composed. She was beautiful. She looked at him, at his sleepless face, his loosened collar, the papers spread across Elizabeth's desk, and her expression moved through several things quickly. Concern, assessment, something harder underneath. "You've been up all night," she said. "Yes." "William." "Caroline!" He turned from the window. "I need to ask you something." She waited. "When we were in Boston, when I told you about this estate, about Elizabeth, about my marriage, what exactly did I tell you?" She blinked. "What do you mean?" "I mean precisely what I said. What did I tell you about her?" Caroline was quiet for a moment, choosing her words the way a woman chooses when she senses ground shifting beneath her feet. "You said your marriage had grown distant," she said carefully. "You said you and Elizabeth had been, that you had grown apart. That you said she was cold, disengaged. That she cared more about the management of the estate than about me. Than about the marriage, yes." William nodded slowly. "I told you she was cold." "William, she was not cold." He said it quietly, without accusation, which somehow made it worse. "She was exhausted. She was carrying 22 years of management and decisions and protection on her own because I was too busy feeling neglected to look at what was actually happening in my own house." He looked at Caroline. "I told you she didn't love me anymore. You did say that. I was wrong." The silence in the library was absolute. Caroline's composure held. She was a woman who had spent her life reading rooms and adjusting. But William watched something shift behind her eyes, a recalculation, a recognition, and for the first time he wondered who Caroline Whitmore actually was beneath all that arrangement. "What are you saying?" she asked. "I'm saying I don't fully know yet." He was honest, at least. He owed her that much. "I'm saying I have just spent the night learning that my wife was a woman I never took the time to understand. And I think I need some time to sit with that." Caroline looked at the desk, at the papers, at the portrait of Elizabeth that hung on the wall above the fireplace, a small portrait, not commissioned, just something a local artist had done years ago. Elizabeth, at perhaps 35, her dark hair pinned her expression thoughtful, the way she always looked when she was thinking hard about something. "She's everywhere in this house," Caroline said quietly. It was not quite an accusation. It was not quite a complaint. It was the most honest thing William had heard her say. "Yes," he said. "She is." He found her grave that afternoon. The family plot was at the far edge of the east garden, enclosed in a low iron fence shaded by 2 oak trees that Elizabeth had insisted be planted there when his father died. William had not attended to the planting. He had been in Richmond. The headstone was simple. She would have wanted simple. He knew that, had always known it actually, though he had often overridden her preferences in the name of what looked proper. Elizabeth Ann Harrington, 1773, 1817, beloved. Faithful. True. 3 words. She had chosen them herself. Thomas had told him that. William stood in front of that stone in the summer heat, and he did not have words. He had spent 30 years being a man who had words for business, for society, for every room he walked into. He had never been short of words. He was completely empty of them now. He just stood there. After a while he said, "I didn't know." He knew she couldn't hear him. He said it anyway. "I didn't know any of it. I thought you were... I let myself believe you had stopped, that you had checked out of this marriage the same way I had, and I used that to justify..." He stopped, started again. She kept everything. He said to the oak trees, to the summer air, to the name carved in the stone. Every record, every transaction, every decision, and not one of them, not once, did she use any of it to make me feel small or wrong or... His voice broke. He pressed his hand flat against the stone. "What kind of man doesn't see that?" he said. "What kind of man is surrounded by that kind of..." He couldn't. He stood with his hand on the stone until the grief passed from sharp to dull, the way grief does when a man finally stops fighting it. Then he straightened. He looked at the 3 words she had chosen: beloved, faithful, true. And William Harrington made quietly and without ceremony the first honest promise of his adult life. He would find out what she had been trying to protect. He would finish what she had started. And somehow, though he did not yet know how, he would make sure that the name Elizabeth Harrington meant something in this county long after the name William Harrington was forgotten. He went back to the house. Thomas was waiting on the porch. "Sir," Thomas said, "there is one more thing." William looked at him. "Go on." Mrs. Harrington left instructions regarding Mr. Aldridge. Thomas kept his expression neutral. She said, and again I quote directly, "William will try to handle it the way he handles everything, directly and without enough information. Give him the red folder first, then get out of his way." William blinked. Then, for the first time in what felt like an eternity, something almost like a smile moved across his face. "She knew me well," he said. "Better than most, sir." "The red folder, Thomas?" "Yes, sir." Thomas produced it. "I've been carrying it since this morning." William took it. He stood on the porch of his estate. Elizabeth's estate he was beginning to understand in every way that mattered, and he opened it. Inside was everything Elizabeth had gathered on Robert Aldridge. It was devastating, and it was only the beginning. The red folder was not thick. That was the first thing William noticed. Elizabeth had never been a woman who needed volume to make a point. She had always believed that precision was more powerful than quantity. A belief William had once dismissed as a limitation of her education, and now recognized as one of the sharpest weapons she had ever carried. He took the folder inside, back to the library, back to her chair. He opened it. The first page was not a legal document. It was not a financial record. It was a handwritten note in Elizabeth's clean, slanted script, dated just 6 weeks before her death. "William, if you are reading this, then Thomas has followed my instructions, which means he has already told you about Robert Aldridge before you had the chance to storm over there and confront him without knowing the full picture. Good. You always led with your temper when you should have led with your eyes. What follows is not everything I know. It is everything you need to know first. Read it in order. Do not skip ahead. I know you will want to. Don't." He almost smiled again. Almost. He read in order. Robert Aldridge had been a neighbor for 14 years. He had attended the Harrington Christmas dinners. He had shaken William's hand at county meetings and called him a friend. He had hosted the dinner party at which William had met Caroline Whitmore. That last detail sat in William's stomach like something rotten, because according to Elizabeth's documents, it had not been coincidental. She had found the connection in letters intercepted. She explained in a careful note, through a source she did not name, a source who had been loyal to the Harrington household for a decade, and who had placed herself in a position to gather information that Elizabeth had not asked her to gather, but had accepted with gratitude when it was offered. Robert Aldridge had known about Caroline Whitmore before that dinner party. He had arranged the introduction. William set the page down. He picked it up again. He read that line 3 more times. Robert Aldridge had spent years attempting to acquire Harrington land through financial pressure, calling in favors, influencing creditors, manipulating the county water rights dispute of 1814 to create pressure on the Harrington eastern fields. When Elizabeth had quietly and systematically blocked every one of those attempts, Aldridge had changed his strategy. He had decided to destroy the Harrington marriage instead. A man without a wife managing his household. A man distracted by infatuation. A man in Boston for 6 months while his estate sat unattended. That was a man whose holdings could be acquired piece by piece, quietly, without the obstacle of a woman who noticed everything and forgot nothing. "God," William said aloud. The library was empty. No one heard him. He said it again because once was not enough. He sat with that knowledge for a full 10 minutes, not reading, just sitting, letting it move through him, the way terrible things must be allowed to move through a person before they can be dealt with properly. He had been played. He had walked into Robert Aldridge's design like a man walking into a room without checking what was on the other side of the door. He had done it willingly, eagerly. He had called it a second chance at happiness, and Elizabeth had known, or had begun to suspect, and she had documented it and organized it and left it for him in a red folder with a note that said, "Read in order," because even in her final weeks she had been more concerned with making sure he had what he needed than with making sure he understood what she had suffered. He turned to the next page. The documentation Elizabeth had gathered on Aldridge was meticulous. Bank transfers, land purchase records, letters between Aldridge and at least 2 members of the county water board that suggested financial arrangements which went well beyond friendly influence. There was correspondence between Aldridge and a Boston solicitor, a man William did not know that appeared to concern the management of certain debts that on paper were not connected to Harrington at all, but which, when followed through Elizabeth's careful notations, traced back to creditors who had applied pressure to the estate in 1813 and 1815. The years Elizabeth had quietly resolved. The years William had assumed were simply good years. He reached the final document in the folder. It was a letter from Elizabeth to her own solicitor, a man named Caldwell in Richmond, written 4 months before her death. Mr. Caldwell, I write to you in confidence regarding a matter of some urgency. I have assembled what I believe to be sufficient evidence of financial impropriety and deliberate interference in the affairs of Harrington Estate by our neighbor, Mr. Robert Aldridge. I have chosen not to act on this evidence myself for reasons that are personal rather than strategic. I find I have less energy for battles than I once did, and I believe this particular battle belongs to my husband if he chooses to claim it. I ask only that you hold this record in trust until such time as it may be needed. If Mr. William Harrington comes to you, please assist him in whatever way serves the estate best. If he does not come, if circumstances unfold in such a way that he has no interest in the estate's future, then use your judgment. You have always had good judgment. Yours faithfully, Elizabeth Harrington. William read the letter twice. Then he stood up, walked to the fireplace, and stood there with both hands on the mantel, staring at the cold grate, and breathed. She had not acted on it herself. She had gathered all of it, months of careful intelligence, methodical documentation, evidence that would have given her every right to launch a public war against Robert Aldridge. And she had held it. She had held it and left it for him because she believed this battle belonged to him, and because she believed he was still capable of fighting it, even after everything. Even knowing what he had been doing in Boston, she had still believed he was capable of being the man this estate deserved. William pressed his forehead against his hands on the mantel. Behind him he heard the library door open. He did not turn around. "William." It was Caroline's voice. "Not now. I think it needs to be now." Her voice was different, not the careful musical tone she usually deployed. Something stripped down, more direct. "I've been thinking all morning, about what you said, about what's in those papers." He turned then. She was standing in the center of the room and she looked different. Something in her posture, something in her expression. The arrangement was still there, but something beneath it had cracked slightly, and through the crack, William could see for perhaps the first time something real. "You should sit down," she said. "I've been sitting all night." "Then stand." She folded her hands in front of her. "I need to tell you something about Robert Aldridge." The air in the room changed. "What about him?" Caroline took a breath. "He knew about you. Before the dinner party. He spoke to my cousin about you, specifically about your estate, about your marriage. He suggested the introduction. I didn't know why then. I thought it was simply—" She stopped. "I was flattered. A man of his standing taking an interest in arranging—" She stopped again. "I was not naive, William. I knew what I was walking into. But I did not know I was walking into someone else's plan." William looked at her for a long moment. "You knew he arranged it. I knew he suggested it. I did not know why. But you suspected." The silence stretched. "I suspected it was because he wanted you distracted," she said finally. I did not suspect it was because he wanted your land." She met his eyes, and for a moment William saw the real calculation that lived behind Carolyn Whitmore's beauty. The intelligence she kept dimmed, because dimmed intelligence was more comfortable for the men around her. She had been using people for years, as people in her position must. But she was also in this moment choosing to be honest. He didn't know what to do with that. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I read the room wrong," she said simply. "I thought I was coming into a household that was finished, that your wife was a woman you had moved past, that there was nothing here but an old house and some land." She looked around the library. "I was wrong about that." "You were wrong about a great many things. So were you." She said it without venom, just fact. "That doesn't settle between us differently because she's gone, William. You made choices. I made choices. We made them with the information we had, which turned out to be incomplete." William looked at her. He thought about what it would mean to be angry at her. He thought about whether anger was what he actually felt. What he actually felt was something he could not name, yet a hollow, expanding sense of a life seen from the wrong angle for too long. "What do you want, Caroline?" She was quiet for a moment. Then, "I want to go back to Boston." He blinked. "I don't belong here," she said. "I knew it when I walked in yesterday, and I've spent the night trying to talk myself out of knowing it. But she is in every room of this house, William. Not as a ghost, as a presence, as evidence of something." She paused. "I don't know how to compete with evidence." He didn't ask her to stay. He wasn't sure if that said something about who he was now or who he had always been. "I'll arrange a carriage," he said. "Thank you." She moved toward the door, stopped, turned back. "For what it's worth, I think she knew what she was doing leaving you all of this. She knew you'd read it. She knew it would change something." Caroline looked at him steadily. "She was betting on you, William, even at the end." She left. He stood in the library alone, and the house settled around him the way an old house does, with small sounds and familiar silences, and he felt for the first time what it actually meant to be inside it. Thomas arranged Caroline's departure by noon. William watched the carriage roll down the gravel drive and through the iron gates, and he felt the particular quiet of a man who has just made a decision without quite deciding anything. The choice had made itself. Some choices do that when you finally stop arguing with them. He turned back to the house. "Thomas." "Sir?" "I need to call on Caldwell in Richmond." He looked at the red folder under his arm. "Elizabeth, solicitor. I can have a horse ready within the hour, sir." "Good." William paused. "And Thomas, the staff. I owe them an explanation. About recent months. About my plans for the estate going forward." Thomas regarded him for a moment. "That would mean a great deal to them, sir. I know I should have thought of them sooner." "Mrs. Harrington thought of them," Thomas said. Not as a rebuke, just a fact placed carefully on the table between them. "She thought of everyone," William said. "That was the problem with my thinking of no one." He gathered the household staff in the main hall that afternoon. It was not a large staff, 6 in the house, 3 in the stable yard, 2 in the kitchen garden, but they stood before him with the particular stillness of people who have been uncertain for months and have learned not to show it. Elizabeth had told them their positions were secure, but Elizabeth was gone, and William had returned with a woman none of them knew, and there had been 3 weeks of held breath. He looked at them. Cook, whose name was Mary and who had been with the estate for 15 years, and who had, according to Elizabeth's records, personally negotiated a lower rate on the household provisions during the lean year of 1815, because Elizabeth had asked her to, and trusted her to do it right. Young James from the stable, who was 17 now, and who Elizabeth's records showed she had arranged an education for actual reading lessons, paid from the household accounts, recorded neatly in a column Elizabeth had labeled simply necessary investments. He looked at all of them. "Mrs. Harrington's instructions," he began, and his voice was rough at the first word, but steadied as he went. "We're clear regarding every one of you. Your positions are secure. Your wages continue. Nothing about the estate's management changes without discussion." He paused. I owe you more than that statement. I owe you an acknowledgement. He looked at Mary, at Thomas, at James, and the others. I was not present. For a long time I was not present in the way this household needed me to be. Mrs. Harrington was present. She was present in ways I am still learning the full extent of. And because of that, this estate is standing. Because of her, and because of the work each of you did alongside her. He stopped. I'm sorry it took me this long to say that clearly. Mary's jaw worked. She was not a woman given to displays. She had been managing a kitchen and its staff for 15 years, with the kind of competence that passes entirely unremarked until it disappears. But her jaw worked, and her eyes went bright, and she nodded once, a short, fierce nod that contained several years of unspoken things. Thank you, sir, Thomas said, for all of them. Thank her, William said. When you remember her, thank her. He rode to Richmond the following morning. Caldwell's office was on the second floor of a building that smelled like paper and candle smoke, which was the smell of legal work in 1817, and Caldwell himself was a small, precise man of 60, with a face built for keeping confidences. He stood when William entered. Mr. Harrington. He did not offer condolences immediately, which William appreciated. There would be time for condolences. I've been expecting you. She told you I'd come. She said it was likely. Caldwell gestured to a chair. She also said it was possible you wouldn't, and if that was the case, I was to use my judgment. He paused. I'm glad you're here, sir. It simplifies things. She left a request, William said. In her letter to me. She said to read the documents first, and she said there was a request. Yes. Caldwell opened a drawer and produced an envelope. She asked me to give you this in person, not leave it with the estate documents because, and I quote, William responds better when he has had to make an effort to receive something. Leaving it too accessible would allow him to receive it too quickly without proper preparation. William stared at the envelope. She knew me down to the bone, he said quietly. She was a remarkably perceptive woman, sir. Caldwell said it simply without flattery. The way a man says something, he has believed for years. What do you know about Robert Aldridge? William asked. Caldwell's expression changed. Slightly. Enough. What I know, he said carefully, is that Mrs. Harrington spent considerable time and care building a case that would hold in a legal proceeding should you choose to pursue one. What I also know is that Aldridge is a man of significant local standing, and pursuing him publicly would require you to do something you may find uncomfortable. What? Caldwell looked at him steadily. It would require you to explain publicly how his interference went undetected for so long. It would require you to acknowledge before Virginia's landed community that it was your wife, and not you, who identified the threat, documented it, and preserved the estate against it. The silence in the office was particular. William understood it completely. Acknowledging Elizabeth's role meant acknowledging his own absence from it. It meant standing before the men who had deferred to him at county meetings, who had asked his opinion on land matters and water rights and crop rotation, and saying, I was not the man I represented myself to be. My wife was doing my work while I was doing nothing. It would not destroy him financially. It might destroy something else. Is there another way? He asked. Caldwell was quiet for a moment. There are always other ways, Mr. Harrington. You could sell the evidence to a third party. You could pursue Aldridge privately through back channels and reach some arrangement that keeps the matter quiet. He paused. But Mrs. Harrington's request, which is not a condition of the estate, only a request, and she was very specific that it be only a request, was that you choose the public path. Why? She believed, and she wrote this to me directly. She believed that the only way to fully honor what she had done and to fully protect the estate going forward was for the record to be set straight. Not in private, in public. Caldwell folded his hands on the desk. She also believed that it would be good for you. Good for me. Her words, sir. She said, it will be painful for him, but William has always hidden the parts of himself he was ashamed of. This will not allow him to hide. And I hope that if he cannot hide, he might finally find out who he actually is, underneath all the hiding. William sat with that for a long, long moment. The thing about hearing yourself described by someone who loved you clearly, really saw you all the way through, was that there was nowhere to argue with it. There were no defenses. She had already accounted for the defenses. She had been thinking about this for years, he said. I believe she had been thinking about many things for many years, sir. And she still... He stopped. She still left the decision to me. Entirely. He opened the envelope. The final request was 1 page. 1 page in Elizabeth's hand. And it was the most devastating page he had ever read, because it was not devastating in the way of anger or grief, but in the way of absolute clarity. She did not ask him to be different. She asked him to be honest. William, you do not owe me anything. Please understand that first before you read the rest. You owe me nothing. What I gave to this estate I gave because I chose to. What I gave to our marriage I gave because I chose to. I do not wish to be repaid. But I am asking you as the one last request of a woman who spent 20 years trying to see you. Clearly, I am asking you to stand up in front of the people who have known you and tell them the truth. Not about Aldridge, not first. First about me. Tell them what I did. Tell them what the records show. Not because I need the credit. I will not be there to receive it. But because this estate and its people deserve to have the truth known. And because I think you deserve to be the man who tells it. You are capable of more than you have shown William. I have always believed that. I believe it still. Whatever you decide, I forgive you. I forgave you a long time ago. I just never found the right moment to say so out loud. He sat in Caldwell's office for a long moment with the letter in his hands. Then he folded it, tucked it into his coat against his chest, stood up. Mr. Caldwell, he said, I need to know the date of the next county assembly. Caldwell looked at him, really looked at him, and something shifted in the older man's expression. Something that looked unexpectedly like relief. 3 weeks, Mr. Harrington, the 15th of August. I'll be there. William picked up his hat. And I'll need you there as well with the documentation regarding Aldridge fully prepared. Of course, sir. William moved toward the door. Stopped. She was right, you know, he said without turning. About what she said. That it would be painful. Most worthwhile things are, Caldwell said. William turned and looked at him. She said that to me once, William said. Years ago. I know, Caldwell said quietly. She said it to me too. He rode back toward Harrington Estate with the afternoon sun at his back and Elizabeth's last letter against his chest, and somewhere along that road between Richmond and home, William Harrington started to understand something that should have been obvious for 20 years. The measure of a person was not what they accomplished when everyone was watching. It was what they did when no one was. Elizabeth had spent 20 years doing the quiet, unglamorous, essential work of a life, while he had spent 20 years standing in the visible places, accepting credit for the shape of things. She had not resented him for it, or if she had long since moved past resentment into something more difficult and more generous. She had kept faith with him, even at the end, even knowing what the end would look like. He thought about the assembly, about standing before the men of Virginia's landed community men who shook his hand at meetings, men who deferred to the Harrington name and saying what needed to be said. He was afraid. He recognized it finally for what it was. The fear of a man who has built his identity on a surface and has just discovered the surface was never load-bearing. The real structure of his life, the thing that had actually held, was Elizabeth. And she was gone. And all that remained was the choice of what to build in the space she had left. He pressed his hand briefly against his chest against the letter. I hear you, he said quietly to the road, to the summer air, to whatever remained of her in the world. Then he rode home. The house was quiet when he returned. Thomas met him at the door. Thomas was always at the door. William was beginning to think the man simply lived there and helped him with his coat. "Everything all right, sir?" "No," William said honestly. "But it will be." Thomas took that without reaction. "There was a visitor this afternoon while you were away." William looked up. "Mr. Aldridge, sir. He came by to offer his condolences." Thomas paused. He also inquired about the estate's current management. Whether you intended to remain. Whether there might be portions of the eastern land you would be interested in selling given the— Thomas chose his word carefully. Given the changed circumstances. The cold that moved through William was not anger. It was something quieter and more dangerous than anger. "He came here." "Yes, sir. 3 hours after your departure." Thomas's face was neutral. "I told him you were away on business and offered no further information." "Good." William stood in the hall of his estate and thought about Robert Aldridge, sitting across from him at a dinner table, laughing at something William said, refilling his glass, arranging a casual introduction to a young woman named Caroline. He thought about the documents in the red folder. He thought about the years of quiet, deliberate effort to take what the Harrington family had built. "Thomas." "Sir?" "Has the land on the eastern boundary been surveyed recently?" "Mrs. Harrington had it surveyed last autumn, sir." "Of course she had." "And the water rights dispute, the 1814 matter, is it fully resolved?" "Mrs. Harrington resolved it in 1815, sir. Quietly. She didn't want to." Thomas paused. "She didn't want to draw attention to how it had been manipulated." William nodded slowly. Elizabeth had known. She had known exactly what Aldridge was doing, and she had addressed each move quietly, without drama, without alerting him to the fact that someone was watching. She had played her own long game while he had been oblivious. She had done it alone. "Have Mary keep something warm for supper," William said. "I'll be in the library." He went back to Elizabeth's chair. He opened her ledger to the first page, and he started reading again from the beginning, because he had the feeling that the first reading had only shown him the outline, and he needed to understand every line. 3 weeks until the county assembly. 3 weeks to understand fully what Elizabeth had built. 3 weeks to decide what kind of man was going to stand up in that room and speak. He turned the page. The lamp burned steadily beside him. The house settled and breathed around him. And for the first time in 6 months, possibly the first time in much longer than that, William Harrington was exactly where he was supposed to be. 3 weeks is not a long time when a man is trying to rebuild his understanding of his entire life. William discovered this on the 4th morning when he turned the last page of Elizabeth's 3rd ledger and realized he had been reading for 72 hours with only brief interruptions for sleep, and he still had not reached the end of what she had left him. He had thought coming into this that he was a man who knew his estate. He had managed it after all, made decisions about it, signed documents regarding it for 22 years. He had walked those fields and inspected those accounts and sat in that chair at the head of the county meetings and spoken about the Harrington property with the easy authority of a man who understood what he owned. He had understood almost nothing. The ledgers made that plain in a way that was almost gentle, which somehow made it worse. Elizabeth had not organized her records as an indictment. She had organized them as a history, a clean, faithful account of cause and effect, decision, and consequence, problem and resolution. Reading them was not like being accused. It was like being shown a painting of a room you had lived in for 20 years, and discovering for the first time what color the walls actually were. On the 5th day he found the journals. They were behind the ledgers, tucked against the back of the drawer, wrapped in a piece of plain brown cloth. 3 small volumes, leather-bound dates, pressed into the covers. The first began in 1795, the year they married. He sat with his hands on the cloth for a long time before he opened them. Thomas came in around midday and set a plate of food on the edge of the desk without being asked, without speaking the way he had been doing every few hours since William had established himself in the library. The man had an instinct for what was needed that William had never once acknowledged in 11 years of service. "Thomas." William did not look up from the journal. "Did you know she kept these?" I knew she wrote, sir. Thomas paused. I didn't know what. She wrote about everything. William turned a page. The estate, the accounts, the weather, what she planted in the kitchen garden. He stopped. What she felt. Thomas was quiet. She was lonely, William said. He said it plainly without the inflection of a man feeling sorry for himself. He said it the way you state a fact about the weather, because it was a fact, and it had been a fact for a long time, and there was nothing left to be gained from softening it. For years. She was lonely for years, and I was present enough that she couldn't call it abandonment, but not present in any way that mattered. Thomas did not offer comfort. William had not asked for it. She doesn't blame me, William said. That's the thing. In 3 journals across 20 years of entries, she almost never blames me. He closed the journal carefully. She asks herself what she could do better. She asks herself how to reach me. She records her failures alongside my absences, with the same handwriting, the same measured tone. He looked up at Thomas. What kind of person does that? Mrs. Harrington, Thomas said simply. Yes. William set the journal down. Exactly. He picked up his fork and ate because Thomas had brought food and because Elizabeth would have thought it foolish to let it go cold. On the 7th day, a letter arrived from Robert Aldridge. Thomas brought it in on a small tray, the way he always handled correspondence. Placed it on the corner of the desk. Said nothing. William looked at the seal, the Aldridge family seal. A small griffin he had once thought represented honest Virginia landed gentry, and felt something move through him that was clean and cold and focused. He opened it. The letter was 3 paragraphs, cordial, expressive of deep sympathy at the loss of Mrs. Harrington, a woman of admirable character, noting that in times of transition, a man sometimes found it practical to consider the consolidation of landholdings, particularly when the management of a large estate fell to a single individual without the benefit of, and here Aldridge had chosen his words carefully, the domestic partnership that often assists in such management. In other words, you're alone now. Sell me the East Fields. William read it twice. Then he set it aside and picked up Elizabeth's journal. He was not ready to respond to Aldridge yet. He would be, but not yet. He found the entry on the 9th day. It was dated October 1816, 3 months before William had left for Boston. I believe William is unhappy. I have believed this for some time, but I have been telling myself it was a season, a mood, the particular restlessness that takes men in middle age and shakes them like a tree in November. I have been patient. I am less certain now that patience is the right response. He came home from Aldridge's dinner last night, and he was different. I noticed it immediately. He had the look he gets when something has shifted inside him, when some new possibility has opened up that he can't quite contain yet. I've seen that look before, when a good business opportunity presented itself, when a friendship was forming that he found genuinely stimulating. I used to see it when he looked at me. I did not ask him about the dinner. I made supper conversation and watched him, and I thought something happened tonight. I don't know yet what it was, but I know it will change things. William stopped reading. He read that paragraph again. She had known that night, the night he had met Caroline. She had looked at his face across their own supper table, and she had known that something had shifted, and she had said nothing, had waited, had continued to manage the estate and protect his assets and keep his household running while watching him across their dinner table fall away from her in real time, and she had still not blamed him. I have been asking myself, the entry continued, what I might have done differently. I know this is a habit that women in my position fall into, the assumption that if something has gone wrong, it must be correctable through our own adjustment, our own greater effort. I am trying not to do that. I am trying to be honest instead. The honest answer is, I think I withdrew. After the flood year, after the accounts crisis of 1813. After those years of quiet emergency, I think I became someone who solved problems rather than someone who was present. I solved everything I could reach, and I neglected to solve the most important problem, which was that my husband and I had stopped actually speaking to each other. That is mine to own. I own it. But I also know that what I see in his face tonight is not a man who misses his wife. It is a man who has found something new and bright and easy and is already deciding he deserves it. I cannot make him stay. I would not want to if he stayed only out of obligation. But I will not let this estate fall. That I can control. William closed the journal. He sat with his face in his hands for a long moment. She had withdrawn. She had acknowledged that, owned it without excusing it. But she had withdrawn into work, into protection, into the labor of keeping everything standing because she did not know what else to do. And he had read that withdrawal as coldness, as disengagement, as evidence that she no longer needed him. He had used her competence as his justification. The thought made him feel sick. He was in the library on the morning of the 11th day when Thomas came in with a different kind of urgency. "Sir." Thomas was not a man who moved quickly. He was moving quickly. "We have a problem." William put down the journal. "What?" "I've just come from the county clerk's office in town." Thomas closed the library door behind him. "There is a petition that has been filed regarding the Eastern water rights." William went still. "Those were resolved. They were resolved by Mrs. Harrington's arrangement with the county board in 1815. But the arrangement was informal. She chose not to formalize it because doing so would have required bringing public attention to the fact that the rights had been improperly influenced in the first place, and she did not want to... She didn't want to expose Aldridge before she had enough on him," William said. "I believe so, sir." Thomas's hands were clasped in front of him. "The petition was filed 6 days ago by an attorney in Richmond on behalf of a land management consortium." He paused. "The consortium's principal investor, according to the clerk's records, is Robert Aldridge." The silence in the library was the kind that precedes action. William stood up. "He moved fast," he said. He moved the day after your return, sir, before Caroline Whitmore's carriage had cleared the county line." Thomas let that sit for a moment. "I believe he knew approximately when you would arrive, and I believe he anticipated that you would be unsettled." He anticipated correctly. William picked up the red folder. He turned it in his hands. "He thought I'd be too distracted by grief and personal upheaval to notice a petition filed with the county clerk." "Yes, sir. And if I had not been in this library, reading Elizabeth's documents for the past 11 days. The deadline for contesting the petition is the 15th, Thomas said, the same day as the county assembly. William looked at him. "She knew," William said. "She knew he would move quickly after her death. That's why she arranged everything so that I would spend time reading before acting. She was buying me time to be prepared before—" He stopped. He opened the red folder. He found the page he needed. The page that outlined Elizabeth's documentation of the 1815 water rights matter, complete with the names of the county board members involved, the nature of Aldridge's financial arrangements with them, and in Elizabeth's careful notation at the bottom, see attachment, signed witness statement from J. Garrett, November 1816. He flipped to the attachment. J. Garrett was Jonas Garrett, a county board member who had, by Elizabeth's account, accepted payment from Aldridge in 1814 to support the water rights manipulation, and who had subsequently experienced a change of conscience, approached Elizabeth confidentially, and provided a signed written account of exactly what had transpired. Elizabeth had a signed confession from an eyewitness. She had been holding it for a year. "My God," William said. "Sir, she was not just protecting the estate." He looked up at Thomas. "She was building a case that couldn't be challenged. She waited until she had every piece before she was willing to move." He set the folder down. "She was going to time it. She was going to use the assembly to expose Aldridge herself, wasn't she? Before she got too ill to—" His voice stopped on its own. Thomas was very quiet. "She ran out of time," William said. "Yes, sir. I believe so." The weight of that settled on William like something physical. Elizabeth had not merely gathered evidence and left it for him. She had been running a deliberate long-game strategy to protect the Harrington estate from a man who had spent a decade trying to take it, and her own death had interrupted that strategy mid-execution. and so she had done the only thing left available to her. She had handed the unfinished work to the one person she still believed could complete it. The man who had given her every reason to stop believing in him. She had still believed in him. He sat back down, not from weakness, from the need to think clearly, and he could not do that standing. "The assembly," he said. "Who will be there?" "The full county board, sir. Judge Hartwell. The major landowners, including Aldridge." Thomas paused. "It's a regular session, but given the petition, the water rights matter will be on the agenda. Caldwell needs to be there, with the documentation. I can send word to Richmond today." "Do it." William looked at the letter from Aldridge on the corner of the desk, the polite, predatory letter with its condolences and its thinly veiled offer. "And Thomas." "Sir?" "When you send for Caldwell, ask him to bring the Garrett witness statement separately. Sealed. I want it produced at the assembly, not circulated beforehand." Thomas looked at him with the expression of a man reassessing something. "Yes, sir," he said. Mausod. 4 days before the assembly, a woman came to Harrington Estate who William had not been expecting. Her name was Margaret Hale. She was 61 years old, sharp-eyed, and wearing the particular expression of a woman who had decided to do something and had not yet decided whether she was glad about it. She had been a close friend of Elizabeth's, perhaps the closest, though William had paid little attention to Elizabeth's friendships over the years, another fact that now sat badly with him. Thomas showed her into the parlor, and William came in and shook her hand, and she looked at him with those sharp eyes and said without preamble, "She wrote to me before she died. She told me about the documents about Caldwell, about what she was hoping you would do. I told her she was being too generous with you, and she told me I didn't know you as well as she did." Margaret Hale sat down in the chair across from him and folded her hands. "I am not certain she was right about that, but I am here, so tell me what you need." William blinked. "I beg your pardon. Elizabeth asked me to come if you were moving forward with the assembly plan. She said you would need someone who knew the county's social landscape, because your plan would only work if it was managed carefully. You cannot simply walk into a room full of Virginia gentlemen and declare yourself insufficient. They will use it against you, against the estate, against everything she worked to protect." Margaret Hale held his gaze steadily. "You need a strategy, Mr. Harrington, and fortunately, Elizabeth thought of that as well." William sat down across from her. "What did she tell you?" he said. "She told me everything." Margaret Hale reached into her bag and produced a letter. He recognized the seal immediately. The pressed rose and held it, but did not hand it over. "She also told me something I think you need to hear from another person, not just from her handwriting, because she worried you would find a way to rationalize it away in her absence." "And what is that?" Margaret Hale looked at him with the directness of a woman who had outlived several versions of the world and had stopped having patience for anything less than honesty. "She was not a saint," Margaret said. "She was a woman who made a choice to love a man who didn't always deserve it, and she made that choice with her eyes open. She was not quietly martyred and perfectly forgiving in some effortless way. She was angry sometimes. She was heartsick. There were years when she thought about leaving." She paused. "I want you to know that because I've seen men in your position decide that a woman's forgiveness was easy because she was somehow beyond ordinary human feeling, and that is an insult dressed up as admiration." William looked at her. "She chose," Margaret continued. "Every day she chose to stay. Every day she chose to protect this estate and this marriage and your name and your legacy. Not because she had no other options, and not because she didn't feel the cost of it, but because she loved you and because she believed this life was worth the tending." The silence in the parlor was very complete. "She told me once," Margaret said more quietly now, "that the thing she wanted most, more than acknowledgement, more than any public recognition, was just for you to understand before she died what you had." A pause. "I think she decided to settle for you understanding it after." William felt something in his chest that he could not organize into thought. "She settled for a great deal," he said finally. "She chose a great deal," Margaret corrected. "There's a difference. One is passive, The other is what she was. She handed him the letter. He held it. What does it say? Read it yourself. She wrote it to me, but she said to share it with you if you were going forward with the assembly. Margaret stood. I'll be at the assembly, Mr. Harrington. So will half a dozen of Elizabeth's friends' women who have watched her manage this county's social architecture for 20 years, while their husbands took credit for the results. We'll be in that room. She looked at him steadily. We'll see what you do. She left. William opened the letter. It was not addressed to him, and reading it felt different for that reason, like finding a truth that had been spoken in his absence about him, without the adjustment that comes when a person knows they're being observed. Margaret, if he's there, if he's moving forward, then I think my faith wasn't misplaced. I want to be glad about that rather than smug, but I will confess, there is a small amount of smugness involved, and I think I've earned it. I need you to do something for me. Not for him, for me, and for the other women who have spent their years managing the things their husbands stood in front of. When William speaks at the assembly, and he will speak, I need you to make sure it is received properly. Not with mockery, not with the kind of careful politeness that buries the meaning. I need it to land. You know how that room works better than anyone. You know which men will try to minimize it, and which men in that room have wives who have been doing the same quiet work for the same invisible years. Help him. Not because he deserves your help, he may not. That's for you to judge, but because what he's going to say needs to be heard, and the world sometimes needs a woman to make sure the right things are actually heard. I trust you, Margaret. You're the only person outside this household who has ever made me feel entirely seen. With love. Elizabeth. William folded the letter. He handed it back to Margaret Hale, who had paused in the doorway. She took it and looked at him with those clear, assessing eyes. Well, she said. She thought of everything, he said. She always did. Margaret tucked the letter into her bag. 3 days, Mr. Harrington. I suggest you spend them preparing what you're going to say. I know what I'm going to say. Knowing it and being able to say it in that room in front of those men are two different things. I know, he said. But she believed I could. Margaret Hale studied him for a moment. Then something shifted in her expression. Not warmth exactly, but the beginning of respect, the kind that has to be earned before it will show on a face like hers. Yes, she said. She did. The night before the assembly, William could not sleep. He sat in the library, Elizabeth's library, her chair, her lamp, and he read her journals one more time. Not from the beginning. He turned to the last entry. The final one. Dated July 1st, 2 weeks before she died. I think I have done everything I can do. The accounts are settled. Thomas knows what needs to be managed. Caldwell has the documents. Margaret will help if needed. I have arranged as best I can for things to continue. I am tired in a way that I think means something different now than it used to. I keep thinking about William. Not with grief exactly. More with a kind of wondering. I wonder if he will be okay. I wonder if he will understand. I wonder if the man I fell in love with in 1795, the man who used to sit with me on the back steps and talk about what he wanted to build, what he wanted to matter, I wonder if he's still in there underneath everything that went wrong. I think he is. I have always thought he was. I hope he finds his way back to himself. Not for my sake, for his. He deserves to know what he's actually capable of. I am going to sleep now. Good night, William, wherever you are. I love you. I always did. He closed the journal. He sat in the lamplight of her library, with her journal in his hands, and the weight of 22 years around him, and he let himself feel all of it. The grief and the guilt and the gratitude, the enormous staggering fact of having been loved that completely by someone he had not fully seen until she was gone. He let himself feel it because she had asked him in her way to stop hiding. Tomorrow he would stand up in a room full of people and tell the truth. Tonight he just sat with her the only way he still could. And he thought, I hear you. I'm here. I'm finally here. The morning of the assembly broke clear and hot, a Virginia August morning, with no apology for itself. William dressed carefully, not in his finest, that would have been the wrong signal, the old instinct toward surface and impression. He dressed like a man coming to do serious work. Thomas was at the door when he came downstairs. "Caldwell arrived an hour ago, sir. He's waiting at the courthouse." Thomas handed him his hat. "Judge Hartwell has been informed the Harrington estate will be presenting regarding the water rights petition." "And Aldridge?" "He arrived in town yesterday evening." Thomas paused. "He's brought his attorney." William nodded. He had expected that. "Sir." Thomas held the door. I believe she would be proud of you." William stopped. He looked at Thomas. Really looked at him the way you look at someone when you finally understand what they've been carrying alongside you. "She was proud of you too, Thomas," he said. "She wrote about you, about your loyalty, your steadiness." He paused. "I should have told you that sooner." Thomas's composure held. It was what Thomas Reed did, but his eyes were bright. "Thank you, sir," he said quietly. William walked through the door. He walked toward the courthouse. He walked toward the hardest, most necessary thing he had ever done. And somewhere behind him, in the morning air of Harrington Estate, in the library, and the garden, and the family plot, where 3 words were carved in stone, something that had been waiting a long time, finally stilled. The courthouse in Harrington County held approximately 80 people comfortably, and approximately 110 people when the matter at hand was significant enough that no one wanted to be left outside. On the morning of August 15, 1817, there were 130 people inside. William noticed that immediately when he walked through the door. He noticed the bodies pressed along the back wall. He noticed the gallery above, which was not typically used for county assembly sessions, filled with women in summer dresses, sitting with the particular stillness of people who have come prepared to witness something. He noticed Margaret Hale in the 3rd row of that gallery, her sharp eyes moving to him the moment he entered, her chin lifting slightly, not in greeting, but in assessment. He noticed Robert Aldridge seated at a table on the left side of the room, his attorney beside him, his posture easy and confident, in the way of a man who believes he has already won. Aldridge looked up when William entered. For just a moment, just a fraction of a second, something moved across his face. Not guilt. Not exactly. Something more calculating. A rapid reassessment. Then he smiled. The smile of a man who had been deploying charm for decades and had never once had to reckon with the full consequences of it. William did not return it. He walked to the table on the right side of the room where Caldwell was already seated, 2 leather satchels open in front of him. Papers organized with the precision of a man who understood that this morning would require everything to be exactly right. "Mr. Harrington." Caldwell kept his voice low. "Judge Hartwell will convene in 10 minutes. Aldridge's attorney has already filed a supporting brief for the petition. They're moving to have the informal 1815 arrangement declared non-binding." "On what grounds?" "That it was reached without proper board authorization." Caldwell paused. "Which is technically accurate because the board members who authorized it were operating under Aldridge's financial influence and therefore could not properly represent the county's interests. His attorney is using Mrs. Harrington's careful avoidance of formalization against her." William felt the cold precision of that. Aldridge had taken the one strategic concession Elizabeth had made her choice to resolve the matter quietly rather than expose the board members publicly, and turned it into a weapon. He was using her discretion against her. "The Garrett statement," William said quietly. "Here." Caldwell tapped a sealed envelope on the table in front of him. "I have it, and I have the corroborating financial records Mrs. Harrington assembled." He looked at William directly. "But Mr. Harrington, the moment we introduce that statement, this becomes a matter of public record. Aldridge's conduct, the board members' conduct, the full history of this dispute, all of it. There will be no containing it after today." "Good," William said. Caldwell looked at him for a moment. "Good," he repeated. Judge Hartwell was 64 years old, humorless, in the way of men who had spent 40 years listening to other people's disputes, and scrupulously fair in the way of men who understood that their reputation was the only currency that compounded with age. He opened the session at 9 o'clock and moved through preliminary matters with the efficient impatience of a man who knew the room was waiting for the main event. When he reached the water rights petition, he looked up over his reading spectacles and surveyed the room with an expression that suggested he was already aware this was not going to be a typical session. The petition filed by the Consolidated Land Management Consortium, he said, requests that this court formally invalidate the informal agreement reached in 1815 regarding the eastern water allocation affecting the Harrington, Pemberton, and Crawford properties. Mr. Weston. He nodded to Aldridge's attorney. You may present. Aldridge's attorney was a man named Weston, who had the kind of practiced smoothness that comes from years of making self-serving arguments sound like appeals to justice. He was good at his job. William watched him work and gave him that. Weston laid out the argument efficiently. The 1815 arrangement had been reached through an informal meeting of county board members operating without full board authorization. Legally, it had never been properly executed. The eastern water allocation therefore reverted to its previous undetermined status, which the petition sought to resolve in favor of the consortium's land management plan. He made it sound entirely reasonable. He made it sound, in fact, as though pursuing this petition was a matter of legal tidiness and proper governance entirely disconnected from the man who had funded it. He never once mentioned Robert Aldridge by name. When he finished, Judge Hartwell turned to the Harrington table. Mr. Caldwell. Caldwell rose. He was methodical and precise, as he always was, and he laid out the Harrington estate's position calmly that the 1815 arrangement had been acted upon in good faith by all parties for 2 years, that the disruption of it would cause material harm to 3 separate landholding families, and that there were significant questions about the origin of the dispute that the court needed to hear before making any determination. What questions? Judge Hartwell asked. Questions, Caldwell said, regarding how the water rights dispute came to exist in its current form in the first place, and regarding the interests of the party who benefits from that dispute being unresolved. He paused. Mr. Harrington would like to address the court directly, Your Honor. A ripple moved through the room. Hartwell looked at William. Mr. Harrington, he said, this is irregular. Yes, Your Honor. William stood. I understand that. I'm asking for the court's indulgence on a matter that I believe materially affects the question before you. Hartwell studied him for a moment. Then he removed his spectacles, cleaned them, replaced them. 5 minutes, Mr. Harrington. William nodded. He turned to face the room. 130 people looked back at him. He knew most of them. Some of them had been coming to Harrington Estate for holiday dinners for 20 years. Some of them had shaken his hand at these very assembly sessions, deferred to his opinions on county matters, treated the Harrington name as a mark of solidity and trust. He saw Robert Aldridge watching him from the left table with that same easy confidence, the smile slightly diminished, now recalibrating. He saw Margaret Hale in the gallery above, still and watchful. He saw Thomas standing at the back wall, his posture exactly what it always was. Steady, contained, faithful. William took a breath. And then he did the hardest thing he had done in 46 years of living. I need to tell you something about my wife, he said. The room was absolutely silent. Most of you knew Elizabeth Harrington as a gracious hostess, a capable manager of a fine estate, a woman of good character and steady disposition. He paused. I was her husband for 22 years, and I am ashamed to tell you that I did not know her much better than that. No one moved. 3 weeks ago, I returned to Harrington Estate after 6 months away, and I found that Elizabeth had died in my absence. He kept his voice even. It cost him considerably. I also found something she had left for me. Documents, records. 22 years of her work organized and preserved with a care and intelligence that He stopped, steadied, that I had not been paying attention to. A man in the third row shifted in his seat. Another coughed. The sound of a large room making the small adjustments that happen when people are uncomfortable with the direction of what they're hearing. William kept going. Harrington estate is solvent today because of Elizabeth Harrington, not because of me. He said it plainly without dramatizing, because Elizabeth would not have wanted dramatizing. She would have wanted accurate. In 1812, when the tobacco harvest failed, she arranged extended credit with 3 separate creditors and sold personal property to cover the gap. I did not know. In 1815, when drought threatened the county's water supply, she had built reserves sufficient to carry us through reserves I had never been informed of because she managed them quietly while I was occupied elsewhere. He paused again. She did this for 22 years, and I accepted the results of her work as though they were simply how things were. He heard something from the gallery above. He didn't look up. He kept his eyes level with the room. I am telling you this, he continued, because what I'm about to present to this court requires you to understand the full context. Elizabeth did not only manage this estate's finances, she also discovered and documented carefully and methodically that the water rights dispute before this court today did not arise naturally. It was manufactured. Now the room changed. He felt it, the shift in attention, the quality of silence going from uncomfortable to alert. In 1814, William said 2 members of the County Water Board received payments documented in bank records that my solicitor has available for this court's review from a source connected to the Consolidated Land Management Consortium. Those payments were made in advance of a board ruling that disadvantaged the Harrington, Pemberton, and Crawford water allocations. He paused. The goal was to create financial pressure on those estates, pressure that could be resolved through land sales, specifically land sales to the consortium's principal investor. He turned and looked at Robert Aldridge. The easy confidence was gone. In its place was the particular stillness of a man calculating how fast the ground was moving under him. "Robert," William said, and his voice was quiet, but it carried in that silent room like a stone dropping into still water. "I think you know what's coming next." Weston was on his feet immediately. "Your Honor, this is irregular and inflammatory." "Sit down, Mr. Weston." Judge Hartwell's voice was not loud. It did not need to be. 40 years on the bench gave a man a certain quality of authority that required no volume. "Mr. Harrington, I assume you have documentation for these claims." "I have documentation, Your Honor. I also have a witness statement." Hartwell looked at him sharply. "From whom?" "From Jonas Garrett, who was a member of the County Water Board in 1814, and who provided a written signed account of the payments he received, the instructions he was given, and the identity of the party who provided them." William nodded to Caldwell, who lifted the sealed envelope. "The statement has been held in trust by Mr. Caldwell since November of last year, when it was provided to my wife." Weston was speaking again, rapid and controlled, objecting to procedure to the introduction of evidence without prior notice to the irregularity of the entire presentation. He was competent, and he was working hard. But the room was not listening to Weston. The room was watching Robert Aldridge. Aldridge had not moved. He was a man with enough experience to know that movement in a moment like this would look like flight. He sat perfectly still, and he looked at William with an expression that had traveled in the past 3 minutes through several stages and arrived somewhere that was not quite anger and not quite fear, but contained elements of both. "You don't have enough," he said. His voice was low, meant only for the table he was sitting at, but in a silent room it carried. William heard him. "Elizabeth had more than enough," William said. He was not shouting. He was not performing. He was just saying what was true. "She spent 3 years building a case that would hold in exactly this kind of proceeding. She thought of everything, Robert. You should have known that about her before you decided she was simply a woman you could work around." Something moved through the gallery above. Not loud, just movement. The movement of women sitting up straighter. Judge Hartwell opened the sealed envelope himself. What followed took 2 hours and moved with the systematic efficiency of a proceeding in which one side has overwhelming documentation and the other side has only the gradual dismantling of a long-maintained position. Caldwell presented the bank records, the payment transfers, the connection between the board members and the consortium, Elizabeth's timeline, annotated in her precise handwriting, showing the sequence of manufactured pressure, The water dispute, the land offers the financial nudges, extending back 7 years. Weston objected at intervals. Hartwell overruled at intervals. Aldridge sat with his attorney and consulted in low, urgent tones, and the expression on his face moved steadily from calculation to something that William recognized, having worn it himself recently, as the look of a man watching a version of himself he had believed to be solid, beginning to dissolve. Jonas Garrett was not present. He had moved to Maryland 2 years prior, but his statement was read into the record by Caldwell in the clear, steady voice of a man who had been waiting for exactly this moment. When Caldwell finished reading, the room was absolutely still. Then a man in the 4th row, a landowner named Pemberton, one of the families affected by the water dispute, said loudly enough to be heard by everyone, "Good Lord!" And the room broke open. Hartwell had to call for order twice. When he got it, he looked at Weston. "Mr. Weston," he said, "does your client wish to respond?" Weston leaned to Aldridge. "A brief consultation." Weston straightened. "Your Honor," he said, and his voice had lost some of its earlier smoothness. "My client requests a continuance to review the materials presented." "Denied." Hartwell said it without pause. "Mr. Aldridge, you are welcome to retain separate counsel and pursue any response you deem appropriate through proper channels. However, for the purposes of this petition," he looked down at the papers before him, "the petition is dismissed. The 1815 water allocation arrangement is confirmed as operative and binding with the court, noting for the record that it was reached in response to a dispute that this court finds to have been manufactured through improper financial influence." He looked up. "This court further recommends that the county's district attorney review the materials presented today regarding the conduct of former board members Garrett and," he checked his notes, "and Mr. Francis Lyons." He looked at Aldridge directly. "Mr. Aldridge, I would encourage you to speak with your attorney about the implications of today's record for your personal legal standing." Aldridge said nothing. He looked at William. It was not the look of a man who was finished. Men like Aldridge were rarely finished with one proceeding, but it was the look of a man who understood that the game he had been playing for 7 years had just been permanently altered. William held his gaze, and then deliberately he looked away. Because Aldridge was not the point of this morning. He had never been the point. The room took 20 minutes to clear, which it did slowly in the way of rooms where something significant has happened, and no one quite wants to be the first to leave the presence of it. People stopped at William's table. Pemberton shook his hand and said something grateful and warm that William absorbed without fully processing. Crawford III, affected landowner, was more formal, but equally sincere. Other men approached with varying degrees of the particular awkwardness that overtakes people when they realize they have underestimated something for a long time. William was courteous to all of them. He was thinking about Margaret Hale, who had come down from the gallery and was standing at the back of the room, watching him handle the stream of people with the assessing patience of a woman waiting to deliver a verdict. When the last of them cleared, she approached. "Well," she said. "Well," he said. "You didn't dramatize." She wouldn't have wanted dramatizing. Margaret nodded slowly. Something in her face settled, not quite softened, but settled. "She told me once that she thought you were capable of genuine honesty, that you had it in you, but you'd spent so long with it buried that she wasn't sure you'd ever find your way back to it." She paused. "I told her I wasn't sure either." "And now?" Margaret studied him with those clear, sharp eyes. "Now," she said, "I think she was right, which means she was right about you twice, once when she married you, and once when she bet on you at the end." She adjusted her bag on her arm. "That's 2 more times than most women get to be right about the same man." William looked at her. "Thank you," he said, "for coming, for what she asked of you." "Don't thank me," Margaret said. "Do something with what she gave you. That's the only thank you she wanted." She turned and walked out of the courthouse. Thomas was waiting outside. William came through the door into the August heat, and Thomas was there exactly as he always was. And for a moment, they just stood together without speaking, which was something they had never done before, but which felt entirely natural. How bad will it be for Aldridge? Thomas asked finally. Bad enough. William put on his hat. Caldwell thinks the district attorney will move against Garrett and Lyons first, which will pull Aldridge in by connection. His land management activities will come under scrutiny. Whether he loses everything? William paused. I don't know. Men like Aldridge find ways to reduce their exposure, but he's finished in this county. That much is certain. Thomas nodded. And the estate. The water rights are confirmed. The eastern fields are protected. He looked at Thomas. She protected them herself 3 years ago when she first started documenting Aldridge's moves. Everything today just made it official. They walked toward the horses. She won this fight before she died, Thomas said quietly. She just needed someone to stand up and say so. William stopped walking. He stood on the street outside the courthouse with the summer heat on his face and the sound of the county going about its business around him, and he felt something he hadn't felt in longer than he could accurately remember. He felt like himself, not the self he had been performing for 20 years. Not the authoritative estate holder, the confident public man, the husband who had let distance become habit. Something older than all of that. The man who had sat on the back steps with Elizabeth in 1795 and talked about what he wanted to build, what he wanted to matter. That man. He had been in there the whole time. Elizabeth had always known it. Yes, he said to Thomas. She just needed someone to stand up and say so. He went to the family plot that afternoon. He went alone, which was how he had come to do it, not from isolation, but from the recognition that some conversations needed privacy even when only one person could speak. He stood in front of the stone, and he told her everything. He told her about the courtroom, about Hartwell's face when he read the Garrett statement, about Pemberton's handshake and Weston's increasingly hollowed composure, and the moment when Robert Aldridge had looked across the room at him and understood that the game was over. He told her about Margaret Hale and what she had said and how right she had been. He told her about the gallery full of women who had sat up straighter. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I stood up. I said your name. I told them the truth. The summer air moved around him. I know it's not... He stopped. Started again. I know it doesn't change what happened. I know I can't go back and be the man you deserved for the years you deserved him. He pressed his hand against the stone the way he had the first time he came here 3 weeks ago and a lifetime ago. But I'm going to be him now. Whatever years I have left, I'm going to be him now. Not for my reputation, not for the estate. He paused. For you, because you believed I could. Beloved, faithful, true. 3 words she had chosen for herself. He thought about what 3 words he would want. He wasn't sure he had earned them yet, but he intended to. 2 days later, a letter arrived from Caroline Whitmore. It was brief and honest, which surprised him. He had expected either coldness or false warmth, and she gave him neither. William. I have heard some account of what happened at the county assembly. I will not pretend I fully understand the situation I walked into, or that I behaved with any particular honor in it. I did not. I was calculating where I should have been honest, and I was looking for something I wanted without asking whether I had any right to want it. I am sorry for my part in it, that is all. I hope you find your way forward. I think you may actually be capable of it, which I did not entirely believe when I left. C. Whitmore. William read it once. Then he set it in the corner of the desk. Elizabeth's desk. His desk now, though he still thought of it as hers, and he picked up a fresh sheet of paper. He wrote back, Miss Whitmore, thank you for your letter. There is nothing to forgive on your account that I have not already forgiven, as I hope you will forgive what was owed on mine. I think we were both working with a picture that was missing too much of the canvas. I hope you are well. I hope you find what you were searching for. W. Harrington. He sealed it and gave it to Thomas to post. Then he turned back to the desk. There was work to be done. Elizabeth's work. The ongoing management, the accounts, the decisions that kept a household and an estate functioning. He had a different relationship with that work now than he'd had a month ago. He sat down in her chair, and he opened the current ledger, and he started reading with the same attention he had given her journals. He was learning the language she had spoken fluently for 20 years. He was slow at it. He made notes in the margins, questions he could not answer yet. He would ask Thomas. He would ask Caldwell. He would ask the foreman about the crops, and Cook about the household accounts, and James about the horses. And he would listen to the answers the way Elizabeth had listened, not for what confirmed what he already believed, but for what was actually true. He was at 46 years old, finally beginning to pay attention. Said. 3 weeks after the assembly, something happened that William had not anticipated. A woman came to the house, a neighbor, a Mrs. Crawford, wife of one of the landowners whose water rights had been confirmed, and she asked to speak with him. She sat in the parlor, and she told him somewhat nervously that her husband had been having financial difficulties that bore some resemblance to the pressure Harrington estate had experienced, and that she had been managing the situation quietly, as she put it, without her husband's full knowledge, because she hadn't wanted to worry him, and she was wondering whether. She stopped herself, looked at him. "I'm sorry," she said. "I'm not sure why I came. My husband would say this isn't that I should have spoken to him first." "Why didn't you?" William asked. She was quiet for a moment. "Because he handles things by doing something immediately, and I needed to think first. I needed to understand the full picture before—" She stopped again. William looked at her, and he thought of Elizabeth in October of 1812, sitting across from men who wanted to call in debts, negotiating calmly, thinking 3 steps ahead, doing what needed doing, because someone had to. "Mrs. Crawford," he said, "tell me what you know. All of it. We'll think through it together." She looked surprised. Then she started talking, and William listened. He listened the way he should have listened 20 years ago. He listened the way Elizabeth would have. Mrs. Crawford's name was Helen, and she had been managing her household's crisis for 11 months without telling a single person. She sat in Elizabeth's parlor. William still thought of it that way, probably always would, and she talked for 40 minutes straight, the words coming out with the particular velocity of someone who has been holding them in for so long that when the dam finally cracks, everything moves at once. She talked about the letters from creditors she had intercepted before her husband saw them. She talked about the quiet sale of a set of silver candlesticks she had told him were sent for repair. She talked about the conversation she had overheard between her husband and Robert Aldridge 6 months ago, in which Aldridge had suggested with great apparent friendliness that the Crawford family might consider selling the north pasture. At that, William sat forward. "Aldridge approached your husband directly, at a dinner party." Helen Crawford pressed her hands together in her lap. "He was very smooth about it. He didn't make it sound like an offer. He made it sound like he was doing us a favor, like he'd noticed we were stretched and wanted to help." She paused. "My husband almost agreed on the spot. I spent 2 weeks talking him out of it." "Does your husband know you intercepted the creditor letters?" She was quiet for a moment. "He knows now. I told him last week." A complicated expression moved across her face. It was difficult, for both of us. He felt I had managed him. I felt I had been trying to help him." She looked at William. "I imagine that is a familiar dynamic, Mr. Harrington." It landed with the precision of an arrow finding its mark. "Yes," William said quietly. "It is." He sat back. He thought about Elizabeth, about the years of letters intercepted not from the mail, but from reality itself, the way she had absorbed every difficult truth about the estate's condition before it could reach him in a form that would cause him to react rather than think. He had spent years feeling managed by her competence, had used that feeling as a grievance. Now he understood what it had actually been. It had been love deployed in the only direction available to it. "Mrs. Crawford," he said, "I'd like to help you if I can. Not because I know your situation better than you do, I very much don't. But because Elizabeth spent 22 years being the person in this county who thought about these problems carefully, and I intend to try to be useful in the way she was." He paused. I'm considerably less skilled at it than she was, but I'm learning. Helen Crawford looked at him with the careful expression of a woman deciding whether to trust something. Then she nodded, and they got to work. By the time Helen Crawford left Harrington Estate that afternoon, they had a plan. Not a perfect plan. William was honest about that, honest, in a way he would not have been a month ago, but a solid one built on Elizabeth's documented understanding of which Richmond creditors were reasonable men, who responded to straightforward negotiation, and which were not. He sent her home with 2 pages of notes in his own handwriting and with the name of Caldwell's junior associate in Richmond, who had handled some of the Harrington Estate's quieter creditor arrangements. He also sent her home with something he had not planned to offer. "Take these," he said as she was preparing to leave, and he held out 3 of Elizabeth's ledgers, not the originals, but copies he had begun making himself in his own hand, because the process of copying had helped him understand them pages that outlined her method of managing exactly this kind of creditor pressure. Helen Crawford took them and held them like they were something rare. These were hers, she said. They were. She would want them used. Helen looked up at him. Her eyes were bright. How do you know that? William thought about it. Because she left everything useful to me, he said. And I was in considerably worse standing than you are. He told Thomas about the Crawford situation that evening. Thomas listened without interrupting, which was what Thomas did. And when William finished, Thomas was quiet for a moment. Sir, he said, Mrs. Pemberton came by this morning while you were with Mrs. Crawford. She said she didn't want to disturb you, but she hoped to call again later in the week. William looked at him. What about? She didn't say specifically, but she mentioned that she had heard about the assembly. Thomas paused with the careful deliberateness of a man who chooses his words. She said, and I quote, "It's about time someone said out loud what all of us have known for years." William was quiet. How many women in this county, Thomas, do you think have been doing what Elizabeth was doing? Thomas did not hesitate. Most of them, sir, in one form or another. That sat between them for a moment. Elizabeth knew that, William said. I believe she did, sir. She was not an exception. She was just the one who documented it. And the one whose husband eventually noticed, Thomas said with a gentleness that still managed to be exact. William accepted that. Send word to Mrs. Pemberton, he said. She's welcome any day this week. The weeks that followed moved with a different rhythm than anything William had known in the years of his marriage, or more accurately, a rhythm he had never bothered to hear before, because he had always been making too much noise of his own. He listened now. Mrs. Pemberton came on Thursday, and told him in the careful language of a woman not entirely certain how much to say about a land agreement her husband had been pressured into in 1816 that bore the unmistakable fingerprints of Aldrich's method. William took notes. He sent her to Caldwell. He followed up. Over the next month, 4 other families came to him with variations of the same story. The pattern was always the same. Aldrich had identified pressure points, drought years, failed harvests, stretched credit, and had moved into those pressure points with the careful precision of a man who had been watching for them. He had offered help that was actually acquisition. He had arranged introductions and dinners, and the particular social warmth that makes a man feel seen and valued right up until the moment the terms are due. He had done it for years, and he had been able to do it for years because no one had been comparing notes. Elizabeth had been the only one comparing notes. William found that in her journals, too, a passage from 1815 quiet and unsentimental. I believe Aldrich is doing to the Crawford property what he attempted here in 1813. I have written down what I know. I do not know how to warn Helen Crawford without starting a conversation I am not sure either of us is ready to have. I will keep watching. I will keep notes. Perhaps there will be a moment when it becomes possible to speak. The moment had never come for Elizabeth. It was coming now. Tug. Caldwell called on William in September with news that should have felt like victory and felt instead like something quieter and more complicated. "The district attorney has opened a formal inquiry," Caldwell said. He sat across Elizabeth's desk from William with the manner of a man delivering information he has already fully processed. Garrett's statement, combined with the financial records Mrs. Harrington documented, gives them more than enough to proceed. The inquiry will cover the water board manipulation and potentially extend to several of Aldridge's land acquisition transactions, if the families involved choose to provide testimony. Will they? "I believe so. Several are already speaking with my office." Caldwell paused. "Aldridge's attorney has approached me privately, Mr. Harrington. He is exploring whether there is any arrangement that might be made." William looked at him. "What kind of arrangement?" "The return of certain land parcels acquired under what might be termed coercive circumstances, financial restitution to affected parties, and—" Caldwell set a document on the desk, a letter of public acknowledgement to be published in the Richmond Recorder, confirming that the water rights dispute of 1814 was initiated through improper means. William looked at the document. "He wants to avoid formal prosecution," he said. "His attorney is positioning it as an offer of good faith resolution." Caldwell's tone made his opinion of that characterization clear without requiring him to state it directly. "The decision, of course, is not entirely yours. The other families involved would need to agree." "What do you recommend?" Caldwell considered for a moment. "I think Mrs. Harrington's goal was never the punishment of Robert Aldridge," he said carefully. "I think her goal was the protection of these families and the restoration of what had been taken from them." He met William's eyes. "A formal prosecution would be satisfying, perhaps, but it would be slow, expensive, and uncertain. The arrangement being offered achieves in practical terms most of what she documented this situation to achieve." William looked at the document. He thought about Elizabeth's words in her final letter to Caldwell. "I believe this battle belongs to my husband if he chooses to claim it." She had not told him how to fight it. She had trusted him to decide. "Let me speak with the other families first," William said. "This is their decision as much as mine." Caldwell nodded. "I expected as much." He gathered his papers to leave. Then he stopped. "Mr. Harrington, there is one more thing." He produced a small envelope from his coat pocket. "Mrs. Harrington left this with me separately from everything else. She said to give it to you only if—" He paused. "Only if she felt from what she observed that you had genuinely changed. Not performed change. Changed." William went very still. "She asked you to make that judgment," he said. "She did." Caldwell set the envelope on the desk. "I have been watching you for the past 2 months, sir. I have watched how you handled the assembly, how you handled the Crawford situation, how you have conducted yourself with the other families who have come to you." He straightened. "I believe I am delivering this correctly." He left. William sat alone with the envelope. It was small. His name on the front in her handwriting, William. Just that, the same as the first letter, but this one was different. The seal was not the rose. It was a plain wax seal, pressed with her thumb, no design. He understood that. Everything else she had left him had been organized and prepared and considered. This one she had sealed with her bare hand, the way you seal something private and raw and not quite ready to be formal. He did not open it immediately. He set it on the desk in front of him, and he sat with it for a while, the way he had learned over the past 2 months to sit with things, rather than reacting to them immediately. Then he opened it. It was 1 page. Not the careful, organized prose of her other letters. This was different. The handwriting still hers, still recognizable, but looser. Closer to the way her journals looked when she was writing quickly, thinking out loud onto the page. William. I have been trying to write this for 3 weeks, and I keep starting over because I keep trying to make it organized, and what I actually want to say is not organized. What I want to say is this: I did not leave because I stopped loving you. I want to be absolutely clear about that, because I know you will look for a way to blame yourself more than is warranted, and I need you to understand the truth of it. I did not leave. I stayed. I stayed every single day of our marriage in every way that mattered, because staying was what I chose. What happened to us was not dramatic. It did not happen in one moment. It happened the way most marriages quietly unravel gradually, in the accumulation of small moments of not quite reaching for each other. Not quite saying the thing that needed saying, not quite being as present as we could have been. That is mine as much as yours. I withdrew into the work of this estate when I should have found a way to stay present with you. You withdrew into the world outside when you should have stayed present with me. We both contributed to the distance. I am not saying this to absolve you of your part in it. I am saying it because I need you to know that I see my own part clearly. What I was not able to fix, what I tried for years and could not fix, was that you did not see me. Not all of me. You saw the parts of me that were useful, and the parts that were gracious, and the parts that managed things smoothly, and you accepted those as the whole picture. I am not angry about this anymore. I was for a long time. I am not anymore. I am telling you this because I think wherever you are when you read this, you are finally beginning to see. And I want you to know I saw you too. All of you. The man who could be careless, and the man who could be generous. The man who was vain, and the man who was capable of real tenderness when he forgot to be proud. I saw all of it, and I chose to stay anyway, not because I was foolish, or because I had no other option, but because underneath everything, you were someone I believed in. I believe in you still. I did not leave because I stopped loving you. I left because I finally, in the last year of my life, learned something I should have known earlier, that love cannot exist. Truly exist the kind that sustains a person where respect has been forgotten. Not for long. Not without damage. I am not asking you to feel guilty. Guilt is not what I want for you. What I want for you is a life lived with your eyes open. What I want for you is the version of yourself that exists when you stop hiding and start looking. What I want for you, and I mean this as plainly as I know how to say it, is for you to be happy. Not because you deserve to be happy after everything, but because I spent 22 years loving you, and love, when it is real, wants good things for the person it loves, even after it is done, being able to give them directly. I forgive you, William. I forgave you before I died, and I did it freely, not because you earned it, but because holding unforgiveness costs too much, and I was already tired. Take care of this estate. Take care of the people in it. Take care of yourself. That is all I ask. I loved you on our first day, and I loved you on my last. Your Elizabeth. William put the letter down. He did not press it to his chest this time. He set it flat on the desk in front of him very gently, the way you set down something that is both heavy and fragile. Then he put both hands over his face, and he let himself cry. Not the controlled, brief emotion of a man keeping himself together. Not the kind of grief that a man manages and contains and presents to the world in an acceptable form. He cried the way he should have cried the day Thomas told him she was gone fully from somewhere underneath all the composure and the pride and the decades of not allowing himself to be undone. He cried for 20 minutes. Thomas, to his eternal credit, did not come in. When William finally lifted his head, the library was the same as it had always been. Her chair, her desk, her books. The small portrait above the fireplace, Elizabeth at 35, with that thoughtful expression. He looked at the portrait. "Okay," he said. "Just that." Like a man accepting the terms of something finally laid clearly before him. "Okay." He went to the other families the following week. He went in person, not through letters, not through Caldwell as intermediary, but himself, riding from property to property, the way a man goes when he understands that some things need to be done face to face. He went to the Crawfords and he told them about Aldridge's proposed arrangement. He went to the Pembertons. He went to the 3 other families whose situations Caldwell had identified. He told each of them the same thing: this is the offer. This is what formal prosecution looks like compared to settlement. These are Elizabeth Harrington's notes on what she believed these situations warranted. He laid it all out, and he asked each of them what they wanted. Not what he thought was best. what they wanted. At the Crawford property, Helen Crawford said, "She documented our situation too." She documented everything she could reach, William said. She was building something larger than just the protection of Harrington Estate. I think she wanted to protect all of you. She just ran out of time. Helen was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "The acknowledgement letter. In the Richmond Recorder. That needs to be specific, not general. It needs to name what he did." "I agree," William said. "Then I'll take the settlement," she said. "But only if that letter is exactly what it needs to be." "I'll see to it personally," William said. He went to each family. They all said yes to the settlement. They all said the same thing about the letter. The negotiation of that letter took 3 weeks and was in its own way the most significant fight of the entire proceeding. Aldridge's attorney tried 4 times to soften the language. 4 times William sent it back through Caldwell with the same response, specific, clear, and accurate, or there is no arrangement. The 5th draft was acceptable. It was published in the Richmond Recorder on a Friday morning in October 1817, and by that afternoon it was being read aloud in parlors and dining rooms across 3 counties. It named Aldridge. It named the 1814 Water Board manipulation. It named the systematic pressure campaign against multiple families. It named the financial instruments through which that campaign had been conducted. It did not mention Elizabeth Harrington by name. That had been William's sole addition to the negotiation. He had asked Caldwell to ensure one thing, that the letter included a line acknowledging that the evidence for all of the above had been gathered and preserved by a private citizen of this county acting in service of her community and her neighbors. Aldridge's attorney had not objected to that line. He probably had not understood what it meant. Everyone who had known Elizabeth did. Margaret Hale came to Harrington Estate on the Saturday after the letter was published. She did not send word ahead. She arrived in a carriage in the mid-morning, and Thomas showed her into the library, where William was reviewing accounts, and she sat down across from him and said, "The letter was good." "It was accurate," William said. "That's all I was trying for." "Accuracy is more than most men manage." She looked at him steadily. "There is something I need to ask you." "Go ahead." "Elizabeth's birthday is the 3rd of November. It would have been her 44th. Margaret folded her hands. "Several of her friends, women who knew her over the years, women who understood what she contributed to this county, have been discussing whether there might be some fitting acknowledgement, not a formal memorial. Elizabeth would have hated a formal memorial, something smaller, more her." William leaned back in his chair. "What did you have in mind?" "A gathering," Margaret said. "Here if you're willing. People who knew her, people who benefited from knowing her. People who would like to say in one room together what is usually only said privately or not at all." She paused. "It was not Elizabeth's idea. She is past having ideas, which still seems wrong to me, but I believe it is consistent with what she would have wanted." William looked at her. He thought about Elizabeth's journal. "I keep hoping William will understand someday what we have." He thought about her final letter. "What I want for you is a life lived with your eyes open." "Yes," he said. "Here, the 3rd of November." He paused. "I'll need your help planning it properly." Margaret Hale almost smiled. "That," she said, "is the most sensible thing I've heard you say." The gathering on November 3rd drew 63 people to Harrington Estate. William had expected perhaps 30. He had planned for 40. 63 came, and they kept coming through the morning in carriages and on horseback, and Thomas managed it all with the imperturbable efficiency that William now understood had been shaped and trained and trusted into existence by Elizabeth herself. They gathered in the main hall and the parlor and spilled into the dining room, and there was food that cook had prepared with an attention to detail that William recognized as personal investment. This was not duty cooking. This was cook making something worthy of the woman she had served for 15 years. People spoke. Not formally. There was no podium, no arranged program. Margaret Hale had specifically forbidden a podium. People simply spoke when they felt moved to, in the way of a Quaker meeting or a kitchen table conversation, the words finding their own shape. Helen Crawford talked about the ledgers. about sitting with Elizabeth's notes and finding in her organized handwriting exactly the language Helen had needed to speak to her own creditor language. Elizabeth had developed not through any formal education, but through 20 years of doing the work herself. A woman named Ruth Albright, whose husband was a doctor, talked about how Elizabeth had managed the household during the bad fever season of 1813, when 3 of the estate's workers were ill. Not just managed the house, but sat with them, organized their care. Written to Dr. Albright on their behalf at a time when hired workers were not the typical recipients of such attention. James, the stable hand, who was now 19, stood up and said in the halting way of a young man who had prepared something and was determined to get through it, "She paid for me to learn to read. She arranged it with a schoolmaster in town, and she paid for it herself, and she told me it was an investment in the estate, but—" He stopped, cleared his throat. "But it wasn't. It was for me. She told me that too when she thought I wouldn't remember. She said, 'James, a man who can read can make his own choices.' She said it was the most important thing." He sat down quickly, red-faced. The room was very quiet for a moment. Then a sound moved through it that was not quite applause, and not quite weeping, and was something between the two, the sound of 63 people recognizing something true at the same time. William stood in the doorway between the hall and the parlor, and listened to all of it, and he did not try to manage what he felt. He let it all come. Near the end of the morning, Margaret Hale came and stood beside him. "You should say something," she said quietly. "I know." "Not a speech. You know that." "I know," he said again. He waited until the room had found a natural pause. Then he moved to a place where he could be seen, and he waited for the quiet that came when people understood that the host was about to speak. 63 people looked at him. "I'm not going to give a speech," he said. She would have found that self-indulgent. A few people laughed. People who had known her laughed with the recognition of people hearing something exactly right. "What I want to say," he continued, "is something I should have said for 20 years and did not, and I'm not going to try to excuse that or explain it away. I simply did not see clearly. And I am sorry for that in a way that I know she has already forgiven, which is—" He stopped. "Which is the most Elizabeth thing I can imagine. That she would forgive something before the person she was forgiving had even understood what they'd done." The room was completely still. "What I know now," he said, "is this. Harrington Estate is standing today because Elizabeth Harrington stood it up. This county's water rights are protected today because Elizabeth Harrington documented what needed documenting. Several families in this room have options today that they would not have had because she was watching and thinking and working quietly without credit, without complaint, for years." He paused. "I was her husband. I should have known all of this. I didn't. And I will spend the rest of my life not in guilt, because she asked me not to, but in the attempt to be the kind of man who deserves to have been loved by her." He looked at the room. "She was not my helpmate," he said. "She was not my support. She was not simply the woman who kept my house. Elizabeth Harrington was the most capable, most clear-eyed, most genuinely good person I have ever known, and I called her ordinary for 20 years, because I was too comfortable to look at what was actually in front of me." He stopped. He did not have more prepared. He had meant to have more, but standing in that room with those 63 people, and Elizabeth's portrait on the wall, and Cook in the kitchen doorway, with her hands folded, and James in the back row, sitting very straight, he found that he was done. Sometimes the truest things are also the shortest. "Thank you for coming," he said. She would have been quietly pleased and publicly dismissive of all the fuss. A pause. "Please, stay and eat." She would have insisted on that. The room broke gently, naturally, into the sounds of people moving and talking, and the particular warmth of a gathering that has accomplished something real. Margaret Hale beside him said nothing. He looked at her. "Well," he said. "She was right about you," Margaret said. "In the end. Only in the end." "Most people never make it to the end," she said. "Give yourself that much." The years that followed moved with a steadiness that William had not previously known how to live inside. He did not marry again. This was not a decision he made formally. There was no moment of choice, no dramatic renunciation. It was simply that the life he was building did not seem to require it, and he had reached the stage of his existence where he was done doing things because they seemed required. He managed the estate with the attention Elizabeth had always given it, which meant he was considerably slower at it than she had been, and made more mistakes and had to ask Thomas approximately twice as many questions as Elizabeth ever had. Thomas bore this with his characteristic equanimity and occasional carefully deployed dry observation that William had come to understand was Thomas's version of affection. He worked with Caldwell to help the families Aldridge had targeted recover what they'd lost. The settlement arrangements played out over 2 years, the return of improperly obtained parcels, the financial restitution, the slow, unglamorous work of putting things right. It was not satisfying in any dramatic way. It was just necessary, and he did it. Robert Aldridge sold his Virginia estate in 1819 and relocated to Georgia, which was far enough away that his name faded from the county's daily conversation within a year. William never sought any further accounting from him. Elizabeth had not asked for one, and he had stopped pursuing things she had not asked for. He hired a schoolmaster for the estate, not just for James, who had already outgrown what the arrangement could offer, but for the children of the workers, a thing Elizabeth's records showed she had been wanting to do since 1813, and had never found the right moment to formally propose. It was not a grand gesture. He simply did it because it needed doing, and because he now understood in a way he had not before that the measure of an estate was not just its land and accounts, but what it made possible for the people who belonged to it. In the spring of 1820, James came to William with a letter. He held it the way he always held things that mattered, carefully with both hands, and he said, "I've been offered a position, sir, in Richmond, a counting house. Mr. Caldwell's associate mentioned my name." William looked at him. James was 22 now. He had the bearing of a young man who had been told at a formative age that he was worth investing in, and had spent 6 years trying to be worthy of that assessment. "Caldwell's associate," William said. "That would be young Mr. Perry." "Yes, sir." "Is it what you want?" James considered it with the seriousness the question deserved. "I think so, sir. I think I want to see what I can do somewhere bigger. But I wanted to ask you first." "Why?" "Because Mrs. Harrington arranged for me to learn, and you kept the arrangement going after she—" He stopped. It felt right to ask. William stood up from the desk. He crossed to where James was standing and held out his hand. James shook it, somewhat surprised. "Go," William said, "and do well. And come back and tell me about it." "Yes, sir." James looked at the handshake, then at William. She would have been glad about this, wouldn't she? It was not quite a question. She would have claimed she knew it was coming all along, William said, and she probably would have been right. James grinned a real grin, young and unguarded, and left. William stood in the middle of the library for a moment after he was gone. Then he went back to the desk and picked up his pen. He was writing something. He had been writing it in pieces for several months in the margins of his evenings, in the hours after the accounts were done and the house was quiet. He was not sure yet what it would become. A record, perhaps. A history of the estate. Something that put Elizabeth's name where it belonged, not in the index, but in every chapter, every year, every decision that had mattered. He had asked Margaret Hale's opinion on the first pages. She had read them carefully and said, "It's honest. Keep going." He kept going. The 3rd of November became an annual occasion. Not every year was as large as the first. Some years it was just William and Thomas and Margaret, and a few others in the parlor, talking and remembering. Some years it was 30 or 40 people. In 1822 it was 90, because by then the story had traveled the way stories travel in small counties, and then slightly larger ones, and people came who had never met Elizabeth but had heard about her. Young women mostly. Young wives who had heard that there was a gathering at Harrington Estate on the 3rd of November every year to honor a woman who had spent 20 years doing extraordinary work without credit, and had chosen to leave the credit for someone else to give. They always came. They always stayed. They always left with the particular expression of people who have been shown something they needed to see. One evening in late autumn, a few years after Elizabeth's death, William was no longer counting them precisely. He sat in the library with her journals in his lap, and he read the first entry one more time. October 12th, 1795. We have moved into Harrington Estate. It is a fine house. William is proud of it, and I understand that pride. It is a pride in what his family built, and there is nothing wrong with that. I intend to make this house something worthy of that pride. I intend to make it a home. He set the journal down. He looked at the room around him. She had done exactly that. Every room of this house was what it was because of her choices, her attention, her understanding of what a home needed to hold people together. The accounts were healthy because of her management. The land was protected because of her foresight. The workers in this estate were educated and fairly treated because of her belief that people were worth investing in. The neighboring families who were sleeping soundly in their own homes tonight were doing so because she had spent 3 years quietly documenting a threat she had identified and had trusted William even then, even knowing what she knew, to ultimately do something about. The measure of a life was not its drama. It was not its visible moments, its public acknowledgments, its position on any record that other people maintained. The measure of a life was what it left standing. Elizabeth Harrington had left a great deal standing. William sat in her chair in her library in the home she had made, and he felt not happiness exactly. Not the easy, unexamined happiness of a man who has never reckoned with himself. Something deeper and less comfortable than happiness. Something that had to do with being present in your own life and knowing what it contained. He felt at last like a man who was living in the right direction. He thought about her last words to him. The letter that lived in his coat pocket still, even now, he had never moved it. The paper was soft at the folds from being read too many times to count. I loved you on our first day, and I loved you on my last. He pressed his hand flat over the place in his coat where the letter lived. I know, he said to the quiet room. I know you did. He did not say, I'm sorry. He had already said it in every way it could be said, in every action he had taken, since the morning Thomas handed him a letter in the drive of his estate, and the world had reorganized itself around 4 words. Instead, he said what she had asked him to say to himself eventually when he was ready. Thank you. Just that. For 22 years of faithfulness. For the 3 words carved into a stone, beloved. Faithful, true. For the red folder. For the journals. For the forgiveness extended before it was earned. For believing even at the end that he was capable of becoming the man she had always seen underneath everything he had buried him under. For loving him that clearly. For trusting him with the truth of it. Thank you, Elizabeth. The lamp burned steadily. The house breathed around him. And outside in the family plot at the edge of the east garden, under the 2 oak trees she had planted for his father, Elizabeth Ann Harrington rested in the earth she had spent her life tending. Not forgotten, never forgotten, beloved still. And in every room of the home she had made, in every account she had balanced, in every family she had quietly helped, in every young person who had been told they were worth investing in. In every piece of paper that bore her careful handwriting, she was present. She had always been present. It had just taken William Harrington too long to look.